At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 300 programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Coming up on Booked on Rock, the story of an 80s metal band drummer who is about to have it all. Absurd wealth, global fame, and a dream girlfriend. But an unwitting role as an international spy? That's next.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock. I'm Eric Senich. We have a first-time guest to the podcast. Travis Kennedy is the author of the brand new novel, The White Python World Tour. Travis, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Eric. This is really exciting.
The promo for this book reads, quote, Ricky Thunder, 22-year-old drummer for the scorching new 80s metal band White Python, is about to have it all. Absurd wealth, global fame, and a dream girlfriend. But an unwitting role as an international spy, that was definitely not part of the plan. All right, tell us what led to the idea for this story. What inspired it?
Oh, I've been writing this story my whole life. I'm a kid of the 80s. I grew up during the era that the hair metal bands were on top of the world. I was probably about 8 years old during the time that this book takes place. So to me, watching MTV when I probably wasn't supposed to, they were these Muppets. They were just wild party animals. And I wasn't picking up on the double entendres in the music. It just looked like guys who were zany monsters. But then, in my 20s, I started to pick up the autobiographies. There was just something about the musicians of that genre at that time that was fascinating, which is that more often than not, they were misfits. They came from hard childhoods, and a lot of the time they were outcasts. They didn't have great opportunities. They were working menial jobs. If you watch the film Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, that shows these bands very early, and you see them, they're like pimply kids, and then they put on the makeup and the hair and the leather, and they become these rock gods up on stage. For that couple of hours, they become totally different people. And so that just stuck with me for a long time. Probably about 20 years ago, I started thinking, I want to write a book in this world, and I want to play on that whole there's two different people in these characters and these guys in the band. So then about 5 years ago, I heard a podcast called Wind of Change, and it was developed by a guy named Patrick Radden Keefe, who's a brilliant investigative reporter. He does most of his work with The New Yorker. And the whole premise that he was investigating is this very long-held rumor that the CIA wrote the song Wind of Change by the Scorpions. You now all have it stuck in your head.
I have to listen to the podcast. I remember it, never listened to it.
Yeah, it's great. And I mean, the one thing that he was sort of saddled by is he's a reporter. He's trying to seek the truth. And if the CIA doesn't want you to know that they did it, you're never totally going to find out. So it becomes an awesome sort of study of culture at the time and how the CIA may or may not have gotten themselves involved in other pop culture moments, but they couldn't prove that they wrote Wind of Change. And so I thought, well, take out any responsibility to tell the truth, and that could be a really fun story. And that's where the idea came from. And really, once I started writing it, the pages just flew. It was so fun and so easy to dive in that world and have fun with it.
This is your first novel?
It's not the first one that I wrote. It's my debut novel. I have another one that will come out after that's unrelated to the White Python World Tour that I actually wrote first. So because there's film projects in development and there's a whole bunch of moving parts with the books and with the sort of greater world around both of them, my team decided that we would lead with the White Python World Tour.
Wow. Oh, wait. So this book there's a possibility we're going to get a film project?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So Paramount bought the development rights, at the same time that Doubleday bought the publishing rights. So I've been working in tandem with the folks at Paramount and with the publishers at Doubleday for a little over a year now. And
congratulations,
it's really
man.
moving. Yeah, thanks. It's really
awesome.
exciting.
I mean, this is tailor-made for film. Tailor-made for film, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, a lot of people who read it say, I feel like I was watching it.
Exactly. But here's my question. I was wondering, because reading your bio on Amazon, your work has been featured in the Best New England Crime Stories and Best American Mystery Stories anthologies, Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, and McSweeney's Internet Tendency. Grand Prize winner of Screencraft's 2021 Cinematic Book Contest for Sharks in the Valley, to be published as Welcome to Redemption. So I guess leading to my question, which is this the first time you've incorporated music into a story?
Yes, it took a lot of research to try and understand that world. It's funny, I have two books are in this one story, which is a rock biography and a spy adventure. And I cared a lot more about getting the rock biography material right, because you can say whatever you want about the CIA. You can accuse them of anything. And if they say that they didn't do it, then that just makes them look all the more guilty. So I said the spy stuff can be fun, and it can be, the research can come from movies and other books, but the rock stuff, I did a pretty deep dive into a lot of biographies and autobiographies and films of the era to try and understand what life was like for a struggling metal band in LA in the 80s.
The book begins with Ricky and his band hitting the stage and about to perform in front of a packed arena. He's bleeding, probably some broken bones, and someone is trying to kill him. I'm hooked right away. Tell us about the main character, Ricky Thunder.
You know, it's funny, when I set out to write this, I thought that it would have a more cynical tone than it ended up having. But something about Ricky, right away, he took the story from me. He's an orphan. He grew up with a very hard childhood. He spent most of his time just sort of ducking and covering from the next person who's out to hurt him. But somehow he came out of that just a really positive person, and he channeled all of his fear as a kid and his anxiety as a kid into his fingertips, and he just started drumming on any surface that he could find. And that's where all of his anxiety and his rage was into creating a beat and then creating music. And as he got older, he found bands, and he found his calling, which is to play drums in a band. And I think that the fun thing about Ricky and about his bandmates is the whole point about these guys being misfits and being seen as not having much to offer to the world. That's the lives that they were all living until they started playing music and found each other, and it just unlocked their superpowers. And so Ricky is sort of central to that, this idea that, somebody who you might not think has much value to them, they might have an amazing skill. They just have to find the right people who can help them unlock it. And so he's a sweet guy. He's trusting. He's not perfect, but you want to root for him because he's trying to do the right thing, even though he goes down the wrong road by mistake all the time.
And the story takes place in 1986 at the height of the hair band era, hair metal, Sunset Strip. That was very much part of my youth. As you said, you grew up on that as well. So you were fans of bands like Poison and Warrant. And
oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. You're perfect to choose White for the band name, because we had White Snake, we had White Lion.
Yeah, the guys make fun of that in a chapter where they think that White Snake is an unoriginal name. You might as well just call the band White Animal.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of territory and arguing over what's metal and what's not, and the sense of they're all kind of very aware of their reputations that I think comes through in the book too, and how they chose the name they felt like meant a lot about what kind of band they were.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
I'm going to need some pliers and a set of 30-weight ball bearings.
What?
If Fred gets here before I'm back, you can tell him to start without me.
What the hell you need ball bearings for?
Oh, come on, guys. It's so simple. Maybe you need a refresher course. Hey, it's all ball bearings nowadays.
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock Podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock Podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes, on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. Your source material, Spinal Tap, was that one of the...
Of course.
Of course, okay. Yes, he's Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, Spinal Tap. What other films, books, videos that you used to create not just Ricky's character, but the band?
With the whole band. Yeah, so there's a great oral history of the music of the era called Nothing But a Good Time. And I think they made it into a documentary series on maybe Paramount Plus.
Beaujour, right? Tom Beaujour.
Yes, yeah.
And
I know it's killing me that I can't say it, but yes, Tom Beaujour is one of them. And so that was an awesome piece of source material, especially for the early chapters where the band's just starting out and they're scrapping, and that whether they starve to death depends on how many of the flyers that they print they can actually hand out before their show. Slash's book was great. Keith Richards' book he's not really in the genre, but he lived the lifestyle.
Sure.
So that was great. The Dirt by Motley Crue was another really good one. Between all of those, you could kind of piece together the main themes of who they were as kids and what the life was like and what the life was like when they got too big for them.
All right, so it's Tom Beaujour and Richard Beanstalk.
Yes, thank
Apologies
you.
to Richard. Yep. Yeah, it's a fabulous book. So there's a chapter that goes back to Ricky's childhood, and it was his 12th birthday. That was, as you write, the most important day of his life. This is such a great scene, and you go back to it at the very end of the book. The bands, Zeppelin, The Who, Rush are part of this story. It's a bittersweet moment for Ricky. Can you share with listeners this scene, and if there was a moment like this for you as a kid, or where did this come from?
There really wasn't a moment like this for me as a kid, but it's one of those things where I think a lot of writers will say they surprise themselves with what comes out when they just sort of relax and don't overthink the words that are coming out through their fingers. I was amazed by the time I finished Ricky's backstory in that early chapter, how complete and real it felt to me, because it didn't really come from my life, but quickly for the reader's sake. So Ricky is an orphan, never knew his parents. He's bounced around in foster homes around Southern California for his whole life. Never very good ones. He usually feels unsafe or just paranoid that he's going to be asked to leave sometime in the middle of the night. And he's in a house now that's the worst one. He's in with a bunch of bullies. They pick on him because he's the smallest, and he's letting his hair grow long. And he likes rock music, which they're not into. And so on his 12th birthday, a disaster strikes in the house, a pipe bursts, and everybody runs. And the plumber who comes to fix the pipe catches on that Ricky is just drumming away at the table. And he hears that beat just sounds perfect to him, that he's right on. And this plumber isn't he doesn't work for a record label or anything. He's just a nice guy who says, you should really pursue music. You have a great sense of rhythm. And he does a kind thing. He goes home and he packs up an old record player that belonged to his kid and a few albums, and he leaves it on the doorstep for Ricky. Just a random act of kindness that a nice person did for a kid who he saw could use it. And that sends Ricky on his musical journey. He becomes he just vanishes into these albums, and he finds the thing inside him that he didn't even really know that he was looking for. And so that kicks him off becoming Ricky Thunder. And without getting into too much detail, yes, at the end, Ricky revisits that moment, and I think a poignant and hopefully sort of healing way for him and for us reading, him coming back around to that moment and where it's led him.
I always have to be very careful when I do interviews, and I've done a few now, and they're always fun to do on novels.
Yeah.
To ask questions without giving away too much, so you leave the people guessing because you want them to check this out. But you really did your homework on this, and I bring this up because I'm a big Van Halen fan, and I couldn't help but notice the parallel in the storyline where Gene Simmons from Kiss is showing interest in Quicksand, which is the pre-White Python band, and that's exactly what happened. Gene discovers Van Halen, and Gene wanted to call the band Daddy Longlegs in real life. In the book, he wants Quicksand to change their name to Gerbil, wear purple unitards with long tails and chew cardboard on stage.
Yeah.
And then this is where the band White Python comes in. Lo and behold, you draw comparisons to this band with Van Halen. There you go. They are the hottest band on the Sunset Strip, as was Van Halen. How does Ricky land the gig with this band thanks to his girlfriend?
Yeah. So Ricky is now playing in this garage band. They're playing for dinner, but he's happy because he's playing music and he's living with his buddies and he's living his dream in an abandoned paint store, by the way. But that's life. It's one of the fun details from the books of that era, by the way, which is that they would squat in these unsafe places that nobody would kick them out of.
Guns N' Roses, that story about how they use Steven Adler's drumsticks to make a fire so they can eat, put a little hamburger meat on it and just distribute it evenly among the band members.
It's amazing. Yeah. And it is, I mean, those stories were the thing that got me thinking. They're willing to live anywhere. They're willing to, and they're clever enough to do things like that. I mean, that's pretty creative, and nobody sees them coming. They would actually make like really good spies because nobody would ever suspect that they're smarter than they let on. But so yes, Ricky's living the life, basically, sort of homeless, but not really, playing in this band. And then he meets a beautiful woman and everything changes. And I had some fun with, there's always the classic rock story cliche about the guy gets a girlfriend and the whole band is suspicious of her, Yoko Ono, that she's trying to break up the band. So I thought, okay, well, the fun with satire is take the cliche and make it true. So in this case, he meets a beautiful woman. She changes his life. Within a couple of months, she gets him a tryout for White Python, which is sort of the Van Halen of the universe in this book. And how that job opens up, all of a sudden they need a drummer days before they're recording an album. She might have more to do with than Ricky's aware of, but she's has her boyfriend and she sees a chance to get him in this band, and lo and behold, it works. And then his life turns up to 11. In Spinal Tap.
Yes, and he's in White Python, who are on their way up just the right time for the government to use them as their number one tool, of course. Mm-hmm. How does Ricky and his band White Python find themselves tangled up with the CIA?
So that girlfriend is skilled at a lot more things than Ricky knows, and she is actually an undercover officer with the CIA, and she's chosen him and she's chosen White Python, and she realized she had to put them together. And they determined that the category of metal is not taken seriously enough in the Eastern Bloc, that they would allow it to be sold in stores, but they also don't police it that hard. They don't track it down and throw it out because they just think it's stupid. And so this band is coming up at the exact right time where they can still be manipulated, their lyrics can be manipulated, and their look, and all of the things that that the CIA would want to inject into a psyop in order to win the hearts and minds of people in the Eastern Bloc nations, they can do through this vessel of White Python without the band ever knowing about it. And so you spend a couple of years, the book takes place between 86 and 89, of White Python blowing up and becoming really famous. And at a certain point, Ricky has to be clued into what's happening because they need him to start producing songs for the band to play on a world tour that coincidentally pretty much stretches from Moscow to East Berlin.
Now, her name is Tawny, by the way. That's one of her names.
That's her cover, yeah.
Tawny. Tawny Katane, I'm assuming, is where
that's a good place to grab a name from, yeah.
Yes. Now, I was going to ask you, who do you see playing these characters if there was a movie made on this? So I don't know. You got to be careful maybe.
It's funny. If you had asked me this when I was writing it, I would have given you names, but now I don't think I can. We're at a stage now where we have a writer who is working on a draft, and I think that if the studio and the production company are happy with it, they'll start taking it around to talent. So we've talked a little bit about who we'd like to share it with, but I feel like I've said literally exactly the total amount that I'm allowed to about the movie.
These things can take some time, right? Is there an estimated time as to when you foresee this coming out? Could it be a while?
I don't foresee a time yet, but it's moving so far. And the important thing about a movie is that 1,000 things have to go right to get it made, and one thing has to go wrong to slam the brakes on. So I'm cautious about any predictions, but it hasn't really had a time where it's sort of fallen off the map and been quiet. They really have been moving along. The production company's Gold Day, who had just made the Dungeons and Dragons movie, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, they made Game Night. So they make these sort of big, fun, active comedies. And so they get to work. We started interviewing screenwriters at the end of last year, I think, and we have one on board. And I mean, the steps that need to happen are happening, but I couldn't guess when cameras will roll. I think the first step is getting a good script.
Some great stories while White Python is on the road. So he's hanging out now. Ricky's hanging out with some big timers. He's hanging out with Steven Tyler, Poison. You described Bret Michaels as the handsome man in the room and possibly also the prettiest woman.
Yeah.
It's an idea of the humor we're talking about. The name of the White Python album is All Squeeze, No Venom.
Yeah.
That's perfect. It goes to number one, but eventually Ricky finds out that all of this success came with some help from the CIA. They want White Python, as you said, to be a huge success. They want Ricky to do something. They want him to write a song.
They want to write a song with his help, yes. They know exactly the messages that they want to get across. But beyond that, they want to dress the band in ways that are provocative to people in those nations, that maybe bring to mind the image of their flags. They want to send all of these subversive messages that say, we're on your side and follow us. And the path to freedom, the path to, a beach in Southern California with blondes in bikinis is through an open democratic government. And they sort of weave all of this into the whole White Python image and into the lyrics. And there are lyrics in the book that I think grab. It sounds like it could be an 80s song, but you can also see as very much a psyop in action. And they just want to make White Python the life that people in these nations are so close to grabbing, and will do the last things to push toward fair elections, to push against their leadership, to run underground spy missions of their own. And White Python inspires them, which is hilarious to think about, but also, again, nobody sees them coming. So you can imagine that it would be a good way in.
Yeah, he's on a secret mission to win the Cold War. The song is written, by the way, who is Team Face Melt? And I'm curious as to how you came up with that name.
Yeah, so Team Face Melt are the CIA officers who are collected to work on this years-long mission. And the name comes from them being maybe dumb enough to name their mission with something that sounds like a terrible thing the CIA may have actually done at some point. But they, it's a classic metal term, a face melting guitar riff. And so that's why they called themselves that.
And we eventually get to that moment at the start of the book. Chapter 78 is where Ricky steps on stage bloody. So I'm not going to give away much more. We're going to leave that up to the people listening to get the book. Could you see a sequel?
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you, Eric, the original title of this book was The White Python Reunion Tour. And I started to write the prologue of why this band getting back together could be dangerous. And the prologue just kept going and going, and it was 150 pages. And I realized, okay, I'm writing the origin story, but I do have a sort of 3-act arc in mind for White Python. So I like to think there could be a second and a third book.
Outstanding. Yeah. Now I'm thinking, too, of a soundtrack. I'm thinking of all these things, man.
Yeah. I mean, look, if we make a movie, we need to have the song. The song is central to the whole story. So it's some of the early conversations we're having is how do we go about getting the song just right?
And you see the success of that Motley Crue, Def Leppard, Poison tour last year or 2 summers ago. Can't remember, but it was huge.
Yeah.
So the interest in this era, it's still there. People still love this genre of music, and to combine it with a great spy story it's just fantastic. I love it. The White Python World Tour. It's out now. You can find it where books are sold. Find it at your nearest bookstore, bookedonrock.com. You can look up your nearest independent bookstore. Where can people find you online, Travis?
Well, if you go to traviskennedy.com, it's a quick way to find everything else. You can get to the books page on Penguin Random House. The band has their own website, whitepython.com. Remember to spell white with a Y.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, I mean, Doubleday has been so fun to work with. They made a website for the band. I did a little like Tiger Beat Q&A with each of the 4 band members. And there's a Spotify playlist that's like almost 4 hours long that I put together that's really kind of the soundtrack of the book.
And that's whitepython.com?
Whitepython.com, WHYTE.
All right. Yeah, WHYTE. I'll put the link in the show notes. I got to check that out. Travis Kennedy, thanks so much.
Oh, Eric, thank you. This has been a blast.
That's it. It's in the books.